Hello, my name is Audra Hall, and this is how the media perpetuates misconceptions of PTSD in veterans. This qualitative study aims to do a number of things. Mainly, it aims to assess the role of the media in the public's perception of PTSD in veterans, as well as to understand exactly what the general consensus about the issue is in the public. The study also attempts to inform about post-traumatic stress disorder and understand how this can provide obstacles for veterans as they exit the military and re-enter the civilian world. Finally, this study seeks to identify the misconceptions of PTSD. I have found an abundance of literature on the topic of media's portrayal of veterans and negative perceptions of PTSD. Former executive director and now senior advisor for the National Center for PTSD, Dr. Matthew Friedman, says that PTSD has been known by many names over the centuries, but it has been around since the dawn of man. Friedman tells us that in the Civil War, similar symptoms were counted as soldier's heart, and in the First World War it was known as battle fatigue, and in the Second World War as shell shock. As mental health professionals have learned more about the disorder and its effects on the human brain, it has taken on the name post-traumatic stress disorder. Godet et al.'s 2015 study of PTSD in returning troops presents the idea of moral injury. Moral injury is caused when an individual faces a life or death situation. The individual is often on edge in social situations involving large crowds, can have suicidal thoughts, or even flashbacks to that traumatic event. So much of this literature has analyzed PTSD in veterans, describing why and how such a disorder occurs, and how the public views this in members of the military. Unfortunately, some of the literature has found that people tend to view veterans with PTSD as outwardly violent and not to be trusted. However, as Tucker mentions in her article in the Nation's Health, a publication of the American Public Health Association, she points out that survivors of these traumatic combat situations are more likely to harm themselves than they are others. In situations where there were casualties, the veteran tends to experience a sort of survivor's guilt. In her doctoral dissertation at Bowling Green University, Dr. Stormy Trotter examines the misconceptions of PTSD perpetuated by the media. She posits that the current media coverage does not address the soldier's life beyond the military and how PTSD affects every aspect of their lives, not just their lives in uniform. This is important to remember as we think of veterans as members of our audiences. Because they have served and because they have experienced certain things, veterans provide a unique perspective and may form their opinions differently than their non-military counterparts. Gronk and Fever use their study to emphasize that there is a gap between the civilian world and that of the military. Both of these spheres involve very different lifestyles and different experiences, thus it is often difficult for one to fully understand the other. The last two works that I will mention here focus on the media's coverage of veterans with PTSD. Armstrong and Alatunji cataloged news stories from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and noted that the articles typically had negative connotations. Claycamp and Hypes also analyzed works from the most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. These researchers specifically looked at articles which appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times between 2003 and 2011. They found that the articles published promoted awareness of PTSD, but they all failed to provide a context for soldiers reintegrating into civilian life and the challenges they faced there. I have chosen to do this study not only because I desire to work with a veteran-related organization and need to have an understanding of this group of individuals, but also because I feel that PTSD is a serious and very misunderstood disorder that often scares civilians. Those of us who have never served in the armed forces cannot begin to imagine what goes on in war, or what the effects of it might be. We rely on the media and other citizens to provide us with this information. As practitioners of public relations, I feel that it is important for us to understand societal misconceptions so that we may represent our organizations and our audiences appropriately. Research question number 1. What role has the media played in creating this PTSD culture that encourages misconceptions of returning veterans and their struggles to reintegrate into life back at home? Research question number 2. How does the current perception of veterans in the media help or hinder veterans' reintegration into civilian life? The first research question will assist us in our mission of discovering what role the media plays in the current PTSD culture and allow us to determine whether or not negative perceptions stem from the media's portrayal of PTSD-related incidences. This second question addresses how the perception of PTSD is affecting the veterans' transition from military to civilian. For instance, a number of these men and women are returning to the civilian workforce, and an employer's perception of the disorder may or may not color their perception of veterans as they seek jobs as civilians. The question will help us to evaluate this and know how to appropriately communicate with our audiences so that we do not also perpetuate misconceptions. For this study, I will collect both qualitative data and quantitative data. The qualitative data collected from existing literature will help to draw connections between the media and negative perceptions of veterans and PTSD. The quantitative data will be collected through the survey tool called Qualtrics. I have chosen this program for its ease of distribution and the built-in graphics creator, which will make presentation of the results much faster. Data will be collected from two groups, the control and the test groups. The control group will simply answer a series of questions to gauge their beliefs about veterans and PTSD. The test group will first be exposed to several stories covered in the media, whether this be in television news, on blogs, or in print publications, and then the test group will be given the same series of questions to gauge their beliefs about veterans and PTSD. By the end of this study, I expect that we will discover that there is indeed a connection between the media coverage consumed and the general consensus of PTSD in military veterans. I believe that the results will show that people view veterans with PTSD negatively because of the way the disorder has been represented by the mass media. We have learned throughout this course the great importance of building relationships with our audiences. This study will provide us with a better understanding of a group that is within the general public and will allow us to communicate more effectively with them. This is a very relevant study for the public relations community. With an increasing number of combat veterans leaving the military to return to the classroom or to the civilian workforce, the misconceptions of veterans with PTSD will only become more pronounced. Because this issue will become more pressing, it is vital that we fully understand it so that we can behave correctly. We do not want to be responsible for misinforming our constituents or for offending what may be a valuable group to our organization. We have to understand our audience and what influences them and how they form opinions. In conclusion, I believe that this research will allow us to better understand what the public's perception of PTSD in veterans is, whether it is positive or negative, and know what role the media plays in our understanding of current and past conflicts and the human cost of war. This course has been all about understanding our audiences. We have learned how to identify them, how to quantify them, and how to communicate with them in more effective ways. We want our organizations to be willing and able to accurately communicate with every audience they encounter, including those that are generally misunderstood. And we can avoid alienating certain elements within our publics by being well informed and well educated on the current challenges faced by our society. This will conclude this presentation. Thank you so much for your time.